So did you ever have a dream in which suddenly a phone started ringing and then you realize, no, it's actually my alarm clock, and you wake up and you go from one dream into the next, right? So the sound was in superposition. It was for a moment the phone, or maybe it was a fire truck in the dream, or maybe it was, you know, some other strange event that was creating it, and then suddenly it's the alarm clock. And so that superposition is happening all the time because we are dreaming always while we are awake. But we are often not aware that we're dreaming, and then we call it a projection. But it's happening all the time, that we are living in several different worlds and different dimensions simultaneously. But they're usually not in contact with one another. We're also in deep sleep, and we're also awake in deep sleep. And so what causes change to happen at any of these different planes is not some cause and effect variable from the past within that plane. No, because there is no cause and effect in a dream, right? In a dream, anything can happen at any moment. You know, the phone ringing wasn't caused by someone actually calling you on a phone, right? There was no causality within the dream. The causality was from another dimension into that dimension. It was an intervention, right? So in the same way, what happens in the phenomenal plane, although we want to believe, if we're scientifically minded, that, oh, we can explain everything causally, but you can't. There are things that happen that have no cause in the past. You can't trace it back. This happens in psychoanalysis a lot, where there are events that happen that a client will tell the analyst about, and there will be no way that the analyst can find out, you know, some trauma in childhood that caused this kind of hallucination or this kind of a strange event or interpretation of something, or a paranormal experience, you know. If the client says they were abducted by aliens, for example, most psychoanalysts aren't going to take that literally. They're going to try to say, oh, you have some superego that's trying to abduct you and scare you into something, or have some kind of erotic chakra 2 relationship with you, and, you know, various ways of trying to interpret a paranormal event in terms of a normal event. Or if someone says they saw an angel or a vision, you know, of God or of some being of light, it will be interpreted as on a psychotic level rather than on a mystical level. So there's a confusion of levels and a lack of any ability to discern what is going on when it doesn't fit the theoretical model that everything is coming from the Oedipus complex and from all of those childhood traumas that intervened to create psychic disturbances. But there are disturbances and there are causalities that come as a result of a fluctuation in vibrational frequency. And if one's frequency vibrates at a radically different level, it's going to cause appearances within the level of the phenomenal plane in which one is superposed in that will not be explainable. And once one is aware that it's the modulations of the vibrational frequency that determine the course of destiny, not the events from the past, or even teleological influences pulling you from the future, but is caused by something present in the now, but in another dimension of your own reality. And so this gives a clue as to how to deal with phenomena that require a mastery of the ability to go through the dimensional barrier, through the looking glass, as it were. Okay. let me have somebody write on the board, okay? Could you do it, Swati? Okay. So let's call it the real cause of suffering and its transformation. And we'll give a very simple model of this that is able to make use of simply what is going on in this dimension, but which is forced to recede from it. And below that, we can even call it the 9 nights of the goddess.
Nights?
Mm-hmm.
As in?
N-I-T, N-I-G-H-T. Okay. So, stage 1, right? We called it, or maybe we didn't call it stage, we call it nights, but anyway, number 1, the first stage of this journey is a being of love incarnates in a dimension and gets hurt. A being of love comes into a world and is not met with love. So imagine a soul coming into the womb of a mother, but rather than the mother being exulting and celebrating and being gloriously happy, she's filled with anxiety, or she's filled with anger and upsetness because she didn't want to get pregnant, right? Or she's filled with some kind of sorrow that she hadn't yet finished grieving. And so this soul enters as a being of love, come to bring love into the world, and suddenly is slammed from the looking glass of this new world with, I don't want you here, basically. I can't deal with you. I can't handle you. And this being of love doesn't know how to deal with it, and it is knocked out of itself. It's knocked out of its own beingness as love. Okay? So you can imagine this happening to someone. Okay. 2, when she's knocked out of the state of love, she goes into fear. Right? That makes sense. Because now she's in a strange world, totally helpless, bodiless, and the only connection that she had to a fetal body growing in the womb is no longer a safe place to be. Okay, so number 3, she goes into anger as a compensatory defense against her own fear. Right? That's one thing that is kind of a no-brainer. If you're in a state of fear, you compensate by becoming the bully and getting angry and getting your revenge. How many people can relate to that shift? So that becomes the orbit that she's now in, between anger and fear. So then number 4, are we at? This anger-fear mode becomes intolerable, and so it gets converted into desire. Okay? And most desire, I would say, is a kind of effort to get revenge on the one who hurt you by hurting somebody else in love. Can anybody relate to that? So, then number 5, okay,
Sorry.
converted into desire, and then 5, but the revenge is bittersweet, and the being falls into grief, sorrow, endless sorrow. Can people relate to this so far? For many people, it stops there. The process ends with suicide or depression or alcoholism or some way of being in which that emotional destitution and desolation becomes, turns into a meaningless existence, and one withers away. But there is another possibility. Let me draw a diagram of this first. So, we started with a being of love. And it is kicked out of love and it goes into fear, right? And then it compensates with anger on this side. So it's floating in, we could say it goes from the nucleus to a kind of electron shell, and then this goes down into desire, right? So you could even say that you have the arrows that go from there, and then they get pulled down into desire, and then into let's call it sorrow, despair, dismay, desolation. And it can end a life at that point. But there is a possibility that one will come out of the sorrow with a desire to find love again. But in the meantime, a kind of a hard shell has grown around the love. All of this has created a defensive shell so that the love cannot easily be reached any longer. But if one has a desire to reach that love, it can be strong enough to enable one to enter a state of love again. And this love would not be based on desire for phenomenal plane erotic attraction, but love of its own nature that it had lost. Okay, so, okay, I guess it desires love again. And when it reaches love and is able to stay in a state of love, that love will become joy. And now the story has, become so it desires love again, which it will conceptualize as God, because it doesn't realize it is itself. And then it reaches love. Love becomes joy. And then in the final stage, redemption. Redemption from the weight of sins that it had carried because of its malfeasance in its revenge seeking, whether through love, through anger, through fear, and its behaviors that were defended against love and against goodness. but now it is redeemed. And one is able to live in the light of God consciousness again. So, couldn't be a better ending of the story, right? How many of you have taken the story all the way to the end? Have you redeemed yourself through reclaiming divine love and become a being of joy and a redeemed being of light? The way you were before you came down and incarnated and lost your true nature, and now it's back. The goddess has returned to the throne. Story of Ishtar, right? So, you could say that we're all on this path and we're at one of the stations of the cross or another. But we're all going to go all the way to redemption. And I would say this historic moment is when this is happening at a planetary level. Because the urgency of getting out of the sorrow and the horror that everyone feels now at their complete loss of freedom, and the recognition that the world has gone bad as a result of the lack of love, of a world that had turned to one of hatred, revenge, conflict, and destruction, because no one could stand the amount of anguish they were feeling, and they wanted the world destroyed because they were angry at God, angry at the world, angry at life, and just wanted it all to end. And so the collective wish for that end is unknowingly the wish for redemption and the return to God in the only way that many can do it, through the elimination of the body and the world entirely, and until only the light remains. And others voluntarily return before that time and act as angels and guides and avatars. So that's the fairy tale that we're living through, but many can't get through it on their own without having a little help from their friends. And that's why being a redeemed friend is a very good thing to do. It's a kind of service that is a rare offering. And so if we gain the ability by having been freed from our own sorrows and sins, and having been kicked out of our own domain of love, and we are back in love, and we have that grace to offer, to share, then we make up for all the bad karma that happened while we were in a state of lack and seeking and ignorance. So, how many people can relate to this fairy tale? Yeah? Oh, okay. How many saw that Thomas Merton clip? I think he was very prophetic. You know, this was back in the 60s. You know, and the evidence is that they killed him. You know, he didn't actually die from some strange suicide of being electrocuted. There's a book on it now of new evidence that they offed him, as they offed Martin Luther King and the Kennedys and all the others, because he had become too famous, and he was anti-war and anti the system that had become corrupt, and he was writing books and becoming very popular and very famous, and it became a threat to the establishment. But he said that all the structures would collapse, and aren't we seeing that right now? And it's just the beginning of the collapse, where there's going to be a collapse of the banking system, the money system, all currencies, a collapse of the healthcare system, which is already happening, even the policing system. And you see the governments are at war. Take the US, the most obvious example. One part of the deep state is disloyal to others. There's a power vacuum. Putin said the US government is no longer capable of making an agreement. He said there's no point in negotiating anything because the State Department will say yes, and then the CIA will say no, and the Pentagon will say the hell with both of you, we're going to war, and all three and more fragments, the billionaires, and you have various other power centers in different institutions, and none of them are loyal to the power structure, and there's an increasing amount of anarchy that trickles down to every level of society. And once you have anarchy, and there is no safety, and the army itself crumbles into factions that are fighting civil war-like and externally in war as well, it begins to escalate more and more. And at the same time, another structure that's failing are the supply chains, the growing and the distribution of food. Famine is coming. And in many places it's already here because of floods that have destroyed crops, locusts swarming all over Africa and Asia, and so many other reasons, including in the US, migrant workers not being allowed in to harvest crops because of the COVID absurdity. And so the situation becomes more and more extreme every day. But there's enough disinformation to keep everyone in denial and feeling, oh, it's okay. We'll boil the frogs so slowly they won't even know until they're gone. And so we see this happening now, and in the midst of it, we might awaken to the true nature of what is going on. And if we can recognize it as the path to redemption rather than to damnation, and not approach it with fear, because we have realized the absolute self that we are, that does not die and has no reason to fear the end of a world. We've gone through many such apocalyptic moments, and the world can be redreamed just as it was dreamed in the first place. There's no shortage of capacity on the part of God, the self that we are together, to redream the world, but only when our love and our intelligence has been freed from the prison of the ego and its self-hatred, its fury rather than its ability to love and create. It wants to destroy. So there must be a healing of every soul. And this is the moment when that healing must happen. And those who have attained it themselves become the nurses and spiritual doctors and healers for all of those who are still suffering and becoming ever more terrified of what is happening in the world. And only when we know that the world is not real and we are not afraid of it will we regain the power to redream it. And to be not only present at the creation, but co-creators. And so we are being given literally a golden opportunity to return to the golden light and let it expand and bring about a reflection in the looking glass of the phenomenal plane of the infinite beauty of God. that shows up as a paradise, a Garden of Eden. And it will do so if we have regained the Garden of Eden in our own hearts. But that step has to be completed first. This is an old story. There's nothing new. It's basically the story told by every spiritual tradition. But now is the moment we're living through it. It was predicted. It was prophesied. But it's here. And most people want to say, oh, no, no. People have said that for thousands of years. It's no different. Well, did they have nuclear weapons thousands of years ago? Did they have this kind of global network of a single civilization that could be destroyed, that is so fragile? And what will happen the moment that the first electromagnetic pulse goes off because a nuke is exploded in the atmosphere as part of the wars that are coming, and the grid goes down? What's going to happen when the electric grid goes down to most people? What's going to happen to all those blockchain currencies that won't be able to be traded, will be worthless, and all the other currencies that will have been already bankrupted? What's going to happen when the system is down and you can't travel? Not only you can't travel because the laws won't let you, but you literally won't be able to get from wherever you are to anywhere else, or even know what's happening anymore, because there won't be internet, there won't be phones, there won't be everything you take for granted, gone in an instant. Will you have reached the level of consciousness that will be able to be wherever you want, to understand, to know, to connect with that absolute network of awakened beings who must calibrate and resonate at the right frequency in order to manifest through the fractal phase space a new topological form that will create the appearance of a new dreamscape, a new world, a new paradise? We have to have gained the ability to do that before midnight strikes. So this is the work, the great alchemical work of Sakyoga. And the popcorn is popping in many different places, so there will be more and more beings who get this, whether they hear these talks or they get it internally directly or from some other source. It doesn't matter. The question is, can you take that information and raise your vibrational frequency in accord with what you understand symbolically? Or is there still too much anger, fear, desire, and sorrow to be able to lift off the earthbound nature of ego consciousness and return to the light while the body is alive? So this is the Shiva test. The Shakti test: don't have any of those emotions, don't be affected by anyone, don't be hurt when you're insulted, don't any longer be vulnerable to what happens on the phenomenal plane, because it's only testing your true power to remain as the being of love without fleeing from that essential beauty, joy, and power that is our birthright and our true essence. We must become invincible, conquerors of Maya. So this is the work of the moment and of the age, and it's culminating in a final climactic event. But before that happens, those who have prepared themselves will be able to bring about the rebirth that must come simultaneously with the death. And to do that, we must be fearless and connected to the source in a state of complete unity. Okay, that's the message of the morning. So the floor is open. Durgaji.
Thank you for the beautiful nine nights. I like that number. I don't know why when I heard Thomas Merton too, it felt very clear because I get many times the comment that I'm hiding and I'm here out of fear from my superego that is reflected in the outside. Oh yes, there you're safe, you're hiding from the world, you're not doing action, like all of these attacks. And I never came here out of fear, because here is like, which one is the one? Saint Anthony that went to the desert
Yeah.
to avoid it, and that's to find the demons of the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you find here, because all the demons are inside you. So
That's
is the least
Yeah.
place where you can hide
Yeah.
from the world.
You know what Thomas Merton said? That a monastery is a wisdom school where you come in order to learn how to love. And since that map shows that that is what we have to learn again, we have to learn to love again despite the hurt from the past. I think that is how you kill the demons, through love, right?
Yeah, and your diagram is beautiful for that. There's no way around love, like literally you can't go around
Yeah.
it. You have to cross through it.
Yeah.
But also that thing about fear, that there's no hiding out from what's happening in the world because everything is fractal. So you can't go anywhere.
Right.
Even if the aliens come and take you, they still, it's fractal, so you still will feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no escape from the apocalypse that is happening. But the question I always pose to myself is, where can I be that I be the most service? And that's why I end up here. Because I think, at least for this story, Destiny movie, this is where I can do something. It won't be, it'll be anonymous at the end, but that's okay. That's the idea.
We are all nameless and formless.
Yeah.
So.
So I'm just very grateful to understand. I've been reading also this book that you recommended a while ago, The Archetype of the Apocalypse.
Ah, yes.
And he has said something very beautiful and the conclusions that it is happening. The revelation of God is happening. You can either be conscious about it or unconscious about it. And that will determine how much you suffer. But it's going to happen. So that I'm very grateful for having access to make it all this conscious. And it's painful, but it's going to happen anyway. So you may as well say it. So thank you for the beautiful, constant patience, and you don't get bored of making new diagrams every time. It's incredible. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm biased, but I think you made a wise decision coming here too. But yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I made a small reflection about everything that has been talked, and something that you were also saying yesterday about karma yoga. So now that I was hearing the speech of the Buddhist leader, and he
You mean Thomas Merton, that one? Or?
the one you just sent, the link?
Yeah, he's a Trappist monk. He's Christian, but
Ah, okay. All right. Thanks for the explaining. He said basically you cannot rely on a structure based on the superficiality that is based right now, and he was talking like in the 60s. But it's wise to be based in cultures and ideologies that have gone deeper in the exploration of human consciousness. It's not textually how he said it, but it's what I get out of it. And what I was reflecting was that I think the problem is the big challenge that represents for the modern mind to understand the mechanics of karma yoga today. The mind that is trying to go out of the of the suffering and misery through a spiritual path, due to the distortion created by the capitalist mindset that don't understand the divine reward because only knows profit as money or material enjoyments, and not by following the ways that are naturally designed for man, to find understanding and realization, that it's through the divine path, right? That has been always there, and it's lost. So the less desire and the less wanting to let the character be controlled by the ego's intention, the more freedom and satisfaction and understanding of the life and of that suffering that make you go there. But how the souls understand that in this moment will be the major challenge, which also it's easy to self respond with what we were saying yesterday about that everything is already written in the script of this creator. So it's not much to be concerned or worry or to even participate here in the satsang, but I can make exceptions, and I wanted to touch the point about the karma yoga because it's important to understand it not as a mindset, but as a process that goes on in life, and it's beautiful actually.
All right, beautiful. Thank you very much, Kalki. And that brings up a couple of points. One is that, yes, indeed, who you think you are as an ego is a fictional character, but who's the creator of that fictional character? Okay? And if you take responsibility for being its creator, you can also then modify it. You're no longer stuck with the script that was written before. You can now write a new script. But you have to take responsibility for doing that. And that means you have to detach from the identification with the script and realize you are the author. And when you are the author, you have authority to be able to change, and you are authorized to change the whole world. But you have to claim that authority accurately. Now, another thing Merton said in another of his talks that was too long to send now, but I think useful, but it's basic Christian dogma, is that we are created in the image and likeness of God originally. And then we lose the likeness because we start becoming sinners, and we lose our God-like innocence and joy and beauty, and we fall into these lower states. But the image of God remains. We never lose that. And that allows us to recognize that somewhere within I have access to that power that has brought all of this about. And as one resonates again with the image of God, first of all, it brings more agony because you're aware of the difference between the image and the likeness your life now has, which is no longer godly but more demonic, right? And so that differential creates all of your pain. But as the image gets stronger because you identify again with it, you are able to change the likeness that is reflected in your bodily life, in your habits, in your way of speaking, in your way of acting. Everything again becomes godlike. And then the image and likeness, once they are identical, you have become again an avatar, an actual manifestation of the presence of God in the world. And when there are a critical mass of avatars, that's when the transformation will happen. Okay.
Thank you, Shunya. A question from Alyssa. Alyssa asks, are enjoyments and desires separate things? I find myself being blessed by God constantly and enjoying these blessings mostly without attachment. God hasn't struck me with the bolt yet. But sometimes I question whether enjoyment goes hand in hand with attachment to Maya. It's not so much jouissance, but it's more like being in beautiful places, meeting wonderful people, and people randomly giving me gifts for no reason. I always interpret this as God and thank God constantly for doing this, but feel there may be a fine line between enjoyment and getting stuck in Maya. Do liberated people enjoy Maya at all, or is it more an enjoyment because it is all a reflection of God? Is perspective the key here?
That's a good question. I think it all does have to do with your attitude. And if it is an attitude of gratitude for all of those gifts, and there is a recognition that they are indeed the gifts of God, and they are meant to instill even more incentive to become more godlike, more generous in giving gifts as well as receiving them, giving other people the enjoyment of grace, of divine love, of recognition of their true nature. If you become as willing to give as you were to receive, then you will receive even more, and there will be a virtuous circle rather than a vicious cycle that will increase ever more the gifts that you are able to transmit to others. So don't turn down the gifts, but transform them into the freeing of your own creative intelligence to know how to give back in the most accurate way. Priya.
Thank you. I found this very helpful because I was contemplating before about trying to shift my mind about cause and effect into that it can be spontaneous and it doesn't have a relation, and I found it very hard to even try to grok that, even though like in my heart I kind of feel that it is true, but to really be able to shift, I feel there's a lack of trust that needs to happen. And during the guided meditation, when you said like, can you go through the mirror, and I recognized that there is a trust in you that made me go through the mirror, and I was in this beautiful state of actually trying to think about it, but I couldn't think like you said, like you can't create a thought on your own. There's something else doing that. I think so. My question is about trust, because I find also in this 9 nights that going from the sorrow and desiring love again, there needs to be trust to not be hurt again.
Yes.
So what is the relation between trust and love, and how does one cultivate the trust?
That's a very good question. And I think it's a community like this in which one can see that, well, other people have trusted and they're still okay, and in fact they're flourishing, can make you feel that, okay, love is real again. I can imagine it, I can feel it, the energy field feels more loving and more open, and so, I'll try out my wings again, because there's an internal yearning to want to trust and to want to fly again. So I think when one feels a sufficient amount of support and you are seen as the angelic and divine being that you are, that the wings begin to automatically want to spread, and for the power to come back and for your full divine nature to incarnate. So it's something that's happening because you're receiving from divine love that trust as well. It's not just you having to conjure it up. The grace in which it's being given is something that becomes undeniable. You feel the Shakti, you feel the joy. It starts emerging in a way that can't be stopped. You find yourself smiling and laughing and doing things that are more creative, right? Life transforms, and you become ever more trusting of that infinite nature of creativity that you will be supported at every step, okay? And then you fly and you realize that you have everything you need within yourself. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Purush?
Elena asks, or says, thank you for your teachings. Yesterday in your teaching on Ramana's essential teaching, you said that worship was one of the fundamental pieces of the path. How does bhakti play into this? If one is drawn to an Ishta, how does one cultivate devotion to a form and simultaneously experience the formless? Also, in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, he speaks about bhakti yoga as a good path during Kali Yuga. Can you speak on this?
It's probably the only path that works in Kali Yuga, but now we're at the end of Kali Yuga, and in fact we're not actually in Kali Yuga. there's a fifth secret yuga that we're in, the Sangam yuga, which Sangam means a confluence. And you know, at the confluence of certain holy rivers, 3 rivers, although the Saraswati River is the hidden one, but at the confluence of the 3, they hold the Kumbh Melas, right? And in the Kumbh Melas, all the gurus from all over India come together. And there's every 50 years, and even every 500 years, there's a gigantic special mela. And these melas are to not only draw the energy teleologically from the end of Kali Yuga, but to represent the gathering of the sages, the saints, the avatars, the angels at the end of time, who will come together to create an energy field so powerful that it transforms the whole world. And so that is the confluence that is now happening, which is why a gathering of so many powerful souls have come here to this ashram to create that energy field. And no doubt there will be other hubs in which also such congregations occur that will be the nodes of the planetary network of the new consciousness that will be superimposed over Kali Yuga and transform the planetary surface. So that's underway and under construction, but it's also being driven by that absolute self that is timing everything to happen at just the accurate moment. And so we don't have any individual, any control, or any say in how and when it all happens, but it will be perfectly timed that the right people will come to the right places with the right awakenings to suddenly turn on the light bulb that all the Buddhas will have screwed in simultaneously, and the world will be transformed. So that's what's happening. So in terms of the first question of the Ishta Devta that you want to worship, you have to choose one that you already feel that sense of joy, of honor, of recognition that the icon represents the infinite nature of Godhood or of Buddhahood, or of however that is translated. So you wouldn't choose a god or goddess to worship that you didn't already have those feelings for, or a guru, or a sacred text. It could be any of those, and ultimately it can be the self. And that's the most subtle version of the Ishta Devta that will then be realized in the full embodiment of that self. Because when you are worshiping, you are worth shaping. Your own worth becomes shaped in the image of the god or goddess you're worshiping. And then there's a resonance with that vibrational frequency. And that god, as an image, then it has become a representation of a vibrational frequency that actually descends as a result of your love, and there is a union with that. And then the worship becomes simply the emanation of divine joy and bliss, and you become the embodiment of that God that you worshipped. Okay? Fabian.
So I'm confused again.
Well, that's good.
I feel a lot of love from St. Francis' teaching, because from the I standpoint of view, I don't have to do anything, and that sort of drowns me. It leaves me powerless.
Mm-hmm.
So I even have like a very tough dream this morning, in which work was haunting me. So is this a need of an ego, the I, that feels very creative? I can do whatever I want. It has manifested, but I can't reach liberation. So work is haunting me,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I look at these 9 steps, my ego starts empowering again. Yesterday I was left empty. I couldn't do anything. I just have to meditate my way in the sense that I can't do anything. It's just a blessing. It's just a connection. It's just a, it's like an emancipation from the mind, right? You can't do anything about it. It's just your love, your desire for it that is going to take you. But when I look at these 9 steps, oh, my ego starts empowering. I'm saying like, oh, number 1, number 2, number 3, I've done it all. I want to keep going. It seems like a process. So my question is, why do we talk about a process? Because from yesterday's teaching, I understood that there's no process. You're already there. You just have to give up. So when I start reading at 5, yeah, I'm in sorrow, but I desire love again. So it motivates me to try to do something. So I guess I'm like in a vicious cycle.
Okay, but remember, the absolute self and the relative self are 2 and yet 1. But for the relative self, they are 2. Those 2 circles are separate. So, oh, can we erase that? And then I'm going to draw something else. So the process is only for the relative self. For the absolute self, of course, no process. You're already there. But that has to be communicated to the relative self. And the relative self won't get it because there's an obstacle. And the obstacle is that the relative self is haunted by something that keeps it on the phenomenal plane, keeps it horizontal. It is desire. I desire to work, to make money, to become famous, to have friends, to have time, to have, right? I want to have all of this on the phenomenal plane. That haunting of that desire keeps you from having love, from turning the desire back into divine love. And it's only when you give up the desire for everything on the phenomenal plane and you follow Christ or Buddha or however that's understood, and you become again that being of love, then the whole kingdom is given to you and all else is added unto you. But you have to trade in the unholy ghost of the desire for success on this plane in order to have the success as the messianic avatar who is able to transform the world. But as we go further in time, in a very short time, you will discover there's less and less work to have. Nobody has money to hire you to do work. The system is dead. Real estate isn't being sold. Nothing is being sold. The system is in gridlock, deadlock forever. There's no way out. There's no way it's going to solve that problem now. And so once you realize that that dream is dead, you will let it go and you won't be haunted anymore by the unholy ghost, but now the Holy Ghost will take you up and you become that pure spirit who is then able to give the radiance to others who are still trapped in a narcissistic little dream that can't be fulfilled, and that's only bringing grief now because they feel like failures and they feel like they have lost everything. All of those illusions, you will be able to pop and bring all those souls back up into the light where you are, okay? And so it seems to be a process, but you also realize, no, it's not a process. That's the explicate order, but in the implicate order, you're already there, and that's why the implicate order will inevitably unfold by having its own reflection, again, brought back to perfection.
But how is it that one can work its way to liberation? It's not possible. So
It is possible if your fictional character has been taken over by your real absolute self. Okay? And then the two become one. You see, here's the problem. Okay. For the ego in Kali Yuga, the relative world and the absolute world are completely separate. Okay? And if you're in this relative world, you're stuck. You're haunted and you're conditioned and you're suffering. And there's no way here. There's no way to cross this gap. But because your inherent nature is a reflection of the Absolute, the image of the Absolute, if not the likeness, is still within you. And when you are able to touch into that, then that creates a situation where your essence, which is love, will begin to touch again the Absolute. And this creates, again, that intermediate space. We can call it Christ, we can call it the Buddha, and and this will be the Father, let's say, and then you will be able to see others as manifestations of the Holy Spirit. And so the whole Trinity is then united. And once they are, then the two circles become one. The absolute and the relative become one whole. Samsara becomes nirvana. And the completion of the journey will have taken place. And the relative now expressing the absolute will become a new world. Okay? So every religion has this. You will have the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, and the sentient beings who are the future Buddhas, or you will have Vishnu, and then that become the avatar of Krishna, and then you have the gopis and the gopis that are being played. Every religion has this same triple structure, and you can find it everywhere, because it represents that coming together, that unification of the two spheres into a single whole, that they are being magnetically drawn to attain again, because both of them are the two polarities of love, the north and south poles of the magnet of pure divine love. And those poles of the yin and the yang, the receptive and the active, the Shiva Lingam and the Yoni, they become consummated as a single whole, and the world is then reborn from that consummated union. Hope that was of some help to you.
I'm still lost. Is that when I meditate,
The relative ego.
Yes, I can feel something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's perfectly what you have explained. I
Okay.
feel the presence, and even more and more and more, but I'm still with my eyes closed.
Uh-huh.
And that presence gives me that joy
Okay.
and that peace.
Yeah,
So I'm not doing anything.
that's right.
I'm literally not doing anything. I'm just starting to feel that conversion between the two polarities.
Yes.
My question is, what I read in those 9 points seems that there's an effort that needs to be done.
It's not that it needs to be done. It will happen. It's the script. It's written. It will take place. You don't have to do anything. It's going to take place whether you want it to or not. But the point is, you will find yourself in this process. That seems to be a process because it unfolds in time. But it's all here now. And you don't have to do a thing. Just like when you meditate, you didn't bring that presence. It came by itself. You could meditate and not get it. You don't have control over it. The only way it happens actually is through surrender. But through surrender, you return to love.
And it's beautiful what you said, because I am working currently thinking in my ego that I could bring happiness to others by creating their shelters. So I thought I was I created this narrative in my relative mind that I was doing karma yoga. But I was creating a lot of suffering for myself that created that distance even further.
That's right.
So it seemed like the sorrow was leading me to a point where I'm breaking down.
That's right. And that's part of a process that has to happen. You're not doing it, but you're in it, and it's happening. And that breakdown will then become a breakthrough, and you'll realize it was all a blessing to lose what you thought you needed was your treasure. And the real karma yoga is something totally different that your ego could never have imagined. Okay. One more question before we adjourn. Is there anyone here? You sure? There's one, Vajra.
Thank you. I found it all so very beautiful and relevant. to my own experience. And in the meditation, I was feeling like a lot of peace, but a lot of like energetic vibration simultaneously. And it was such a clear description of like this game of finding yourself when you're already there. This afternoon or before, this morning, I was meditating and I was like, with all of these concepts and exercises and who am I, but I don't exist, but I love God and God loves me, but I'm not here. Like, I was like, well, where's the silence? And I was going to ask you this question of like, then where does the silence, all of that arises from silence, but I'm not coming back to silence. But then in this meditation, it was a kind of a really brilliant answer to that question, and almost an experience of last night's satsang of the absolute being inside of the relative, and also the relative being a part of the absolute, and the third space of the soul that kind of permeates all of the experience, and that is the silence. And as in the game, it's already always there, and the thinking being the only sense of separation, thinking that it's not like that. And then it reminded me of in the Ramana verses when you were talking about pranayama and plant medicine, and that experience being able to sustain what it is that you call from that experience. And I experienced that in this meditation, that after the meditation is over, the vibration actually has persisted, but it starts to come back into thinking very quickly. So I guess, and then in relation to the map that you were drawing, I mean, I find myself definitely between sorrow and desire. And related to that, I wanted to kind of understand what makes that desire to be purified desire, not just for experientials, but for true love of God.
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there. Let me try to briefly answer them. It's love that brings silence, okay? When you're meditating, you can get caught up in concepts, but when you reach that concept that says it's love, right, this is all about, then you will be able to feel that love. Not just love for God, but the love that is God's love in you, the absolute within the relative. And then there's an expansion and a joy that you want to hold on to, and you don't want to think, because you'll lose it if you start thinking, and you'll stay in it. And the longer you stay in it, the less you will want to think. But what will then happen is a very strange metamorphosis. Because, see, the problem is not thinking. The problem is the type of thoughts and the conditioning which is producing those thoughts. So the ego is produced by thought. You are thought into existence. The thought happens, you identify with that thought, and those thoughts tell you, I'm unhappy, I desire this, I feel bad about this, I'm guilty of this, I feel ashamed of this, I'm angry at this. All of these thoughts will come, and to the extent you identify with them, your ego is created by the thoughts and their emotional accompaniments, right? So, as you get into the silence of love, then you realize that you can create a whole new kind of thought. You can recreate yourself with the thoughts of divine love and joy and the higher intelligence that enables a whole new kind of understanding to come. Most of it won't come in an articulated form, but it can. It'll come sometimes as an aha, or it'll come as a vision, or it will come just as a feeling state that will emerge and change everything. Literally, things will start to sparkle. The space will be more beautiful. Everything will shift because your perception has changed. And you'll enter the realm of the miraculous, and you'll realize, oh, that's the real self. And more then, you will become the master of thought rather than its victim and its puppet. So it's not the problem with thought. The problem is that you want to become the one who is the creator, not the one who has been dreamed up by the thoughts of others that you have internalized, along with all of the anger and sorrow that you were never recognized and loved and treated as the divine being you are. All of that traumatic past, then can fall away in the joy of the present, and then the transformation is complete, and you never will go back to that old illusion. Okay? One last question, Purusha, and then we'll adjourn.
Sure. This one's from Carla, and it was about the module from earlier. Carla says, in regards to the 9 stages, if I was born into a mother who in fact provided me with a lot of love, can stage 1 apply in school, where most of my childhood traumas occurred, where I blocked myself or felt unworthy of receiving love, and so it is what I now seek in God?
Yes, it can happen any time. It's bound to happen at the end of Kali Yuga at some point, but it may also be that if you look deeper, there's still some repressed trauma that you haven't touched into that may be there, and you've projected it onto a screen memory of difficulties at school, but that the roots of those difficulties may lie in other conflicts, or even just watching the parents fight, perhaps, or separate, or other stresses in the family system. It may not be directly with the mother, but it may be even the hospital you were born in and that separated you from her at birth. And it may have been that a C-section was needed and it wasn't a natural birth that also has psychological effects. And it may be these days they put so many probes into the uterus before the child is born to learn its gender, or its sex, I should say. Gender is a psychological choice, and whether it has Down syndrome or something, right? They do all of these things and ultrasounds, and they wake up the fetus while it should be remaining dreaming, and they make it conscious too soon. And even though that trauma may be repressed, it has effects on the way that the body develops, on the way that the various latent capacities of the mind will unfold. So many tiny, mini micro traumas can contribute to later on having other kinds of karma in which all of that converges again and expresses itself, even from past lives that can express themselves in this life. So to really see the whole roots of whatever suffering is there, or sense of being a misfit or out of place, or not able to find your niche, whatever that is, once you have returned to that state of love, you'll see the whole process in time as a present moment, and you'll be able to release it all. Okay? So everyone can release your trauma instantaneously the moment you stop identifying with it. It's not a trauma, it's a script that was meant to give you access to an understanding of the importance of love and of your own beauty as a being of love again, and to appreciate love by having lost it, and to appreciate goodness because you were born in a world that lacked it. So we are learning and gaining wisdom through what is not in this world that we wish was here, but that we realize we must be the ones to bring back into the world, not wait for it. We're the ones we're waiting for. Namaste.